Okay. Hi, Anna.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, and you?
Good, thank you. Okay, hi to everyone watching, and thanks for joining us for our third webinar. Okay, so many of you will know that Manta Trust is a charity researching and hoping to conserve manta and mobula rays around the world. We were founded in 2005 in the Maldives, but we now have affiliate projects all over the world. And one of these is the Manta Catalog Azores, which was founded by Anna, who's with us today. And she's going to tell us a bit more about this project and about her work with the mini mantas. I'll just tell you a little bit about how this will work for anyone who hasn't joined us before. Your audio and video is automatically switched off, so you don't need to worry about disturbing the webinar with any noises. The talk will last for about 20 minutes from Anna, and then we'll take as many questions as we possibly can. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please just put them in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or the bottom of your screen on your toolbar, and we'll try to get through as many as we can at the end of Anna's talk. Okay, I'll pass it over to you now, Anna.
Thank you, Flossie. Thank you for having me. So let's see if you can see my screen.
Yeah, perfect.
Whoops. Okay. So, Flossie, can you just confirm that you can see the...
Yep, I can see the presentation. Looks perfect.
Thanks. So thank you all for tuning in. I'll be talking to you about the mini mantas in the Azores. But first of all, I'm going to explain to you why do we call it the mini mantas. So this all started in 2016 when the Manta Trust launched a campaign called Love Mini Mantas. And this campaign had the goal of supporting the listing of all the devil ray species being listed in CITES. And we decided to call it mini mantas because the mantas had already been listed under CITES, and even though the devil rays face the same threats and they have the same life history strategies, they hadn't been listed yet. So this was somewhat of a PR move. And one of the parts of that campaign was a VR film filmed by Danny Copeland in the Azores. And the goal was to take the delegates at CITES, which will vote for the protection of of these species, most of them not being divers or not ever had seen a mobula ray before. The idea was to take them to the Azores and dive with the mobulas there without having to leave the conference. And it was a very interesting and amazing project to be involved with, and I could speak about it the whole day, but I'll leave that for another time maybe. However, if you want to check the video, you can, if you Google the mini mantas of Maria, you'll be able to find it on Vimeo, and you can see not only the VR, but also the behind the scenes. And you can learn a bit more about this experience. So, where are the Azores? The Azores are right in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. So we are basically same distance from Lisbon as we are from New York. And it's 9 volcanic islands sitting on top of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge in a very geologic complex area. And these islands are divided in 3 groups, and they span in a distance of about 600 kilometers. This is the most remote archipelago in the North Atlantic. And before I move on, we are talking about the mini mantas, but not only is the size different between mantas and devil rays, the devil rays are usually smaller than the mantas, but they can also be distinguished by the shape in their mouth and their cephalic fins. So the mantas have what we call a terminal mouth. So their mouth is on the top, the end of the head, and their jaws are even. Their cephalic fins, which are in front of the head, when unfurled, they're paddle-like, and they actually touch in the middle, creating a funnel that they use to help funnel the plankton into their mouths. And in the case of the devil rays, they're more like flap-like, and they do not touch in the middle. So the family is the Mobilidae family. There's one genus and 10 recognized species. And I want to give you a brief overview about the historic references for the Azores. So the first one, it's actually from the 18th century, when Duhamel du Monson mentioned an horned ray for the Azores. However, the description of this animal was quite vague. You can actually see the image on the left side. It's it's a quite vague description, and of course, because of the size of these animals, not a lot of them were preserved in museums. And the second mention of a mobula for the Azores is actually in 1954, when Collins described an oceanic manta ray. From the photo that you can see on the left, the photo is from 1951. It's actually an individual of oceanic manta ray that was harpooned in Horta Harbor in the Azores. And this photo was sent to the National History Museum in London, and they were able to identify this. In the 90s was the Sicklefin devil ray mentioned for the first time for the region. So the species we are able to see in the Azores are the oceanic manta ray. This is the largest of the rays. We see them often, and the sightings have been increasing in the last 4 to 5 years. We also do have the Sicklefin devil ray, or Mobula terrapacana, and that's the most common sighted species, is the one we see forming large schools in the Azores. So this is actually one of the few places in the world where we can consistently see them seasonally forming these big aggregations. We call them mini mantas, but they are not that mini. They can reach up to 3.2 meters, but in average we see them ranging from 2.5 to 70 meters. I have it in feet. It will be something like 6.6 to 8.8 feet. Its lifespan is thought to be at least 15 years. And its most distinguishable features are the color in the dorsal surface. So it's olive green, almost golden color. And then it has gray markings in the ventral area, quite distinct as well, and quite different from the ones in the manta rays. Much more rarely, we also have sightings of the spine-tailed devil ray. This species does not have a pattern on the ventral surface, so IDing them is not an easy task. These are usually quite curiously seen by whale watching companies and not the diving community. However, we have something like 5 or 6 sightings of this species in total, so they're quite a rare sight. I personally have seen it once. So we don't know much about it in the Azores at all. Something we also see quite often, and it's very interesting, is the oceanic manta rays interacting with the Sicklefin devil rays. And this usually entails one or sometimes more Sicklefin devil rays just following the oceanic manta rays around. It's a very, very cool sight every time. And it's very interesting because we really don't understand why this happens. But let me focus on the species we see more often. The Sicklefin devil ray, and until recently they were considered one of the least known mobulids. They were listed as endangered in 2019. They're highly migratory, truly oceanic, and they have a circumglobal distribution. We know now through telemetry studies that these animals are able to dive up to 2 kilometers deep. So they are amongst some of the deepest diving animals in the ocean. And on these dives, they endure temperatures of around 4 degrees, which is quite low. And they have a system called reti mirabili, which is basically a mesh of arteries in their skull that allows them to maintain the brain warm and active while they are doing these deep dives, which sometimes last for a long period of time. And after which they usually spend a lot of time in the surface just warming up. So we know also that they are able to travel long distances, and this means that even though they are not targeted in the Azores, they're only present here seasonally. So this means that even though they're not targeted there, they might be when they continue their trip and they go into other jurisdictions, for so to say. We also know they form these aggregations in seamounts between June and October. As I said, the Azores are sitting on top of the mid-Atlantic ridge, so there are thousands of seamounts around the Azores, but some of them are what we call shallow seamounts, and these are seamounts that where the summit reaches depths that are shallower than 100 meters. Some of these, 3 or 4, are very well known for the mobula aggregations, and these are also diveable sites because their summits sometimes reach 30 meters, 13 in some cases. So these are the places where people actually go dive to see the mobula rays. And some of the most well-known are the Princess Alice Bank, which is around 83 kilometers from Fayal Island, and its summit is at around 35 meters. And also Ambrosio Reef near Santa Maria Island. This one is a volcanic pinnacle. It's around 5.5 kilometers from the north coast of the island, so very close to shore compared to Princess Alice. And its summit is around 45 meters. So what do these aggregations look like? A friend of mine prepared a little clip so I can try and give you an idea. So I'll play it again while I speak, just without sound. So basically, devil rays are usually known as being shy towards divers, and they are usually, but here in the Azores we have these very specific places, and this species in particular is so curious towards divers that these are actually amazing places for us to be able to study these animals. And usually it involves, or these dives involve, hanging on a line in the blue. So most of the time we do not see the bottom. The diving conditions can be quite extreme. Sometimes the currents can be very, very strong. Visibility is not always as good as we see in the video. But basically these are, even though sometimes the conditions are extreme, these are very important places where we have the chance to study these animals. Um, and for that, we can actually use the help of divers as citizen science. And that was basically the idea when I founded Manta Catalog Azores in 2012. So at the time, this species was actually considered data deficient. So we knew basically nothing about them. And the idea was having these people going diving every day and seeing these animals, try to get their help and just start gathering any data we could on this aggregation sites. So basically, we were distributing logbooks to the dive centers that were collaborating with the project. We started small. Now we have around 15 different collaborators in the different islands, which is quite good. So the dive centers give us data on their dives and on their encounters with these animals. And the divers send us their photos and their videos. And because this species has also ventral markings, different from mantas, but the idea was to try and see if we could use photo ID to study them as well. So what people do is they can go on our website, and there is a Google form, quite simple, and they can just fill in the form with information on their dive, and they can submit any images or photos or videos. And basically with the dive centers, they have a logbook. We do a small meeting with them every season in the beginning, and then they collect the data throughout the season. So this is mainly citizen science-based project. And with 7 years of data collection, we now have 231 individuals identified with photos from 2003 to 2019. And 200 of those are Sicklefin devil rays, and 31 are oceanic manta rays. As you can see in this picture, the patterns are quite different. They're not as easy to identify, the Sicklefin devil rays, as manta rays, but it is possible. We also have some melanistic oceanic manta rays. I had not heard of one in the Azores until 2015 when I saw one, and now we have already 5 in our database. Guy explained the other day, but in case some of you didn't see that webinar. So a melanistic manta ray is basically an animal that has excess pigmentation, so it's almost completely black, and it's quite an impressive sight. So that was also an interesting information we got from gathering these photos. The IDs also give us information on habitat preference of different species. So while we see the Sicklefin devil rays mainly around the shallow seamounts and not so often around coastal areas, the oceanic manta ray seems to be present in both places, not only near the shore of the islands, but also around the seamounts. It's interesting because we've been having an increase in sightings on the oceanic manta rays, but it still varies a lot from season to season. Other information we can get from the IDs is a bit on population structure. So we can sex the animals and try and understand if we have more males, more females, if the ratio is similar. So in this case, for the Sicklefin devil ray, we have a slightly male biased population. So we have slightly more males than females. While for the oceanic manta ray, it's more or less the same. The ratio is 1:1. There's a lot of information we can get from not only videos, but also the IDs. In this case, we have an individual, a female that is quite pregnant. We see a lot of pregnant females actually in the Azores, but we do not see juveniles, which is quite interesting. And this animal has been seen a few times, and in this case, it was seen pregnant twice, one in 2011 and another one in 2019. And if you are a Cyclone member, stay tuned, because we're gonna write a little article, and you'll be able to help name this individual in particular. So we do see a lot of pregnant females since the beginning of the season all the way to the end, but we never see juveniles. So no one really knows where do they give birth, which is quite interesting. As I said, we have some resites. Some individuals are sighted from year to year. Other times they are only sighted after 8 years, 9 years, which was quite surprising. And when we first started having these resites, and at the same time, it tells us that the pattern seems to be consistent during the life of the animal. So the fact that we are still able to ID it 9 years after the first sight, or 15 years in some cases, it tells us that the photo ID can be a tool that we can use to ID this species. Any image, sometimes images might not be good for ID, but they also give us information on some curious behaviors. In this case, we see sometimes the Sicklefin devil rays feeding on bait balls of boarfish and long spine snipefish when they're at the seamounts. So they're probably opportunistically feeding, but it's quite an interesting behavior to watch. And we have some pictures of that as well. The other day I saw a very funny meme that said, behind every great shark, there's a great remora. And I think in the case of devil rays, behind every great devil ray, there's at least 2 great remors. So the individuals that we see in the Azores are most of the times accompanied by remoras, sometimes pilotfish, amberjacks, but 96% of Sicklefin devil rays we see have remors, and usually they have 2 or more, so sometimes 5, 6. And of course, for the remors, the benefit is obvious. They get a ride and they get some food. For the rays, it's a big debate, because the remors are supposed to feed on parasites, so they free the mobulus from parasites. But at the same time, when they stick to the same, they have a type of modified dorsal fin that creates something like a suction cup. And when they stick to the mobulus for a long time, they can create very big wounds and sores, and it looks quite painful and unpleasant. So I'm not sure, especially in the case of the Sicklefin devil ray, they dive very deep. So I'm not sure if the parasites would be a big problem, and if they benefit that much from being associated with remorse. But I bet the question on everyone's mind is, why do they visit the seamounts then? Well, I would also like to answer that question. We don't know yet. It could be for reproduction. It could be for feeding. It could be for socializing. At this point, we do not have enough information yet to answer this question. And the main question when I first started the project was actually to understand if it was even the same race coming back every year. And we now know that the Sicklefin devil rays do come back in different years, not necessarily to the same exact seamount. For the manta race, for example, we do not have any resight on different years. So these might just be transient animals that just pass by. So there's still a lot to learn, and I always have the feeling that if you think you're about to answer one question, you are then facing 10 more. So there's always more we can do and we can learn about these animals. So hopefully we will be able to answer this question very soon. Regarding future work for this project, continuing to grow the ID database. Basically, the more pictures we get, the more information we will get. And these type of projects are always long-term. So as long as we keep getting images, we will be able to keep learning more. Another part of the work of this project, and a part that I really like as well, is to work to engage local communities and to raise awareness on the conservation of these animals and their importance. And the VR has also played an important part in this. It has been great to see the local community, the non-diver community, being able to experience diving and interacting with these animals. And it's been great to see people's reaction to knowing more about them. For my PhD, I'm also working with genetics of the Sicklefin devil ray. So the idea is to look at the population structure and possible connectivity between our aggregation sites and other places in the world. And I hope I can talk to you more on that later on when we have some cool results to share. And I've seen on these webinars, one question that seems to be common is people wanting to know how they can help. And there's many things we can do. And of course, if you're diving and you have pictures, you can also always contribute to ID the Manta or Manta Catalog Azores or any other project. But I would like to mention that when we are going as divers, as tourists, there's something very important we can do to help, and that is making sure that the companies we go out with respect the regional codes of conduct, or if there's none in place, there's always the Manta Trust Code of Conduct, and making sure that the local companies we choose are respectful of the animals and the regional laws, and that they support any project that exists in place in the area that we are visiting. I think that's one of the most easiest things we can do to help. This work would not be possible with the support of Lisbon Oceanarium, Yves Rocher Foundation, Save Our Seas. Manta Trust has been amazing during this process of creating the project and just keeping it going. Our partner OMA, it's been great in helping creating tools for kids and activities. All the dive centers, whale watching companies in the region that have been participating, giving data, and all the divers that have sent pictures, videos, the students that have helped me with the photo ID. None of these would have been possible without them. So thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Anna. That was really interesting. I especially liked hearing about how the mobulas follow the oceanic mantas. That's so interesting.
Very interesting.
Do you have any theories on that, on why that might be?
I'm not sure, because I've seen Sicklefin devil rays following the leatherback turtle. So either they like black a lot, or I don't know, they're just curious. I have no idea. I wish I could answer that.
So cool. Okay, we've got a question that comes up quite a bit. What's your most memorable encounter that you've had with these rays?
That's a difficult one. I have to be honest. After many encounters, and I've been quite lucky, I've had some memorable ones. But something that strikes me with the Sicklefin devil rays is, and it happens with manta rays as well, but they clearly come and check you out, and they approach you and they turn their eye directly to you. And even though they're so big, they're completely aware of their size, and they are able to pass really close without touching you. And just every time we have that moment of locking eyes with one of these animals, for me is just breathtaking. But if I have to choose one, when we were filming the VR, I think it was the first day we went out. Right outside the arbor, we see one of the melanistic mantas, one of the black mantas, and it stayed with us for more than 40 minutes. And we were already late for the marine reserve, which we have to book. And the animal was just, everyone had the chance to be in the water with it, and we were filming. And I remember, I think it was me, the last person who got on the boat, and I was in the ladder, and the animal came to the ladder with the cephalic fins super close. And it was just, if we had stayed 2 hours, I imagine that animal would have stayed with us for 2 hours.
That's one of the things I love about them. They are so friendly and curious sometimes, aren't they? That sounds incredible. Okay, I have a kind of related question from Tiff here. She says, great talk, so thank you very much. And she would like to know, what's your favorite to have encounters with, mantas or mobulas, if you could pick?
Ooh, I would have to go with the Sicklefin, with the devil rays, just because we usually see them in groups, while the mantas are usually alone. And even a group of 5 can be already amazing. And we sometimes have groups of up to 40 animals. And as I said, they're not that small. So I think I would go with the Sicklefin devil rays for sure. They have a special place.
That sounds pretty cool, being with 40 of them at the same time. All right, and we've had a few questions about this. One's from Teresa, and we had another one from Best Spot Azores Dive Centre. You might know of it.
Yes.
And they would all like to know, where do the mobulas or the devil rays migrate after you see them? What is their sort of distribution?
Their distribution is circumglobal. Where they go after they leave the Azores, we're not sure. There was a telemetry study that showed that they go south once they leave the Azores towards Cape Verde, but that's about it. We don't know much more. One of the things I would like to do is, if we start getting pictures from other places, it will be super interesting to compare those to the animals we already have in the database for the Azores. But as I said, it's not easy to have such a good place and so easy to encounter these animals as we have in the Azores. That's not very common. But that would be one of the ways to try and understand. Also, the genetic part of the work will probably shed some light on that.
Okay, cool, thank you. Another question related to genetics. Somebody was wondering if, when you look at these large aggregations and you say that you're not sure yet why these animals are aggregating, have there been any genetic studies to see if they're related?
Specifically in the Azores, no. So I'll be looking at that. So we got some samples from the Azores, and we'll be looking at that in the recent future, I hope. Once this COVID situation is over.
Once you can get back to the lab.
One of the goals, yes. Within the samples we have, to try and understand if they are in any way related.
Okay, very exciting. I'll be looking out for that research. Ariana would like to know a bit more about the pregnant females that you see, and she'd like to know if you think that they are reproducing here or mating here and then going somewhere else to give birth, or any other theories on that.
So the fact that we never ever had a record of a juvenile here makes me think that they will not give birth here, but maybe further offshore. We see pregnant females right in the beginning of the season. So they probably mate before they arrive. Their mating scars are usually already healed and they are pregnant already. So they might be here only for socializing, but it's hard to tell. I mean, in their migration, these can be important places where they have the chance to feed as well. So it's very hard to be sure for now, at least.
Okay, thank you. Harrison would like to know, as they're filter feeders, are they also at risk of being hunted for their gills like the oceanic mantas are?
Well, they are not in the Azores, luckily, but the Sicklefin devil is one of the most fished species for their gills in other places in the world. But this just shows that in places like the Azores, even though they're not fished there, they're always at risk of being fished somewhere else because they just move such large distances that borders mean nothing for them.
Yeah, unfortunately. And Haley wants to know if you see any illegal fishing of devil rays or mantas in the Azores.
I've never seen, no. They are caught as bycatch, but very, very rarely. So it's not common at all.
Okay, good. David, and also we have a question from Kador, would like to know about whether you can tag the animals. I know you just mentioned that you had done one tagging study, but if you can find out more about their movements in the future through tagging.
Yes, actually it was not me, it was the team I work with in the University of the Azores that have done this tagging study. Yes, you can always learn a lot through tagging. The downside is the price usually. It's quite expensive to be able to tag these animals, and with these animals diving so deep, that can also be a limiting factor for the tags. But definitely in the future, if more tagging studies are done, we will definitely learn more.
Okay, cool. Okay, now Miriam is asking, well, first she says, thank you for the great talk. And she's wondering how often you see the interactions between the Sicklefins and the oceanics, and if anyone is specifically looking into this and studying it.
Not that I know of. It would be interesting to, if you have different animals interacting at different times, to ID them and see if they could be the same that are interacting more often, but it's not that common. And I guess it depends. They would have to be in the same place at the same time, and that not always happens. We tend to see the oceanic mantas closer to shore, and sometimes in the seamounts as well with the others, but they tend to just be alone. So usually you see one individual, and sometimes they are just accompanied by one of the Sicklefin devil rays. But it's quite interesting, and I would love, and I'm sure a lot of other people would love to know more about why does this happen.
Yeah, super interesting. What are the oceanic mantas doing? Are they just cruising or cleaning, or?
I think they're just cruising and possibly also feeding while around these areas. The fact that we don't have any re-sites, even though we don't have that many individuals, but it leads me to think that they're probably just passing by, and they don't necessarily come back. So I'm not really sure. I'm very interested in learning more about them here, and about the black morse as well. So we don't know basically anything about the oceanic manta rays visiting the Azores, and it will be super interesting to try and understand where they're coming from, and where they're going, just like the Sicklefin devil rays basically.
So much exciting research to be done, sounds like.
So,
Okay, another one from Tiff. Tiff would like to know if you know what the Sicklefin devil rays do when they're doing deep dives. What are they doing down there?
good question. The theory is that they're probably foraging in deep scattering layers, so very rich layers that are deep down. And other species of sharks are known to do that, for example. So yeah, the theory is that they are feeding while at depth.
Okay, cool. Another one on feeding from Nuno. Nuno wants to know, even though the sicklefins mostly feed on plankton, there are records of these animals preying on small fish, like the sniped fish that I think you mentioned. And how often he asked, how often do you think this happens?
I would say whenever they have the chance. So we do have years in the Azores where we have a lot of these bait balls around, and during these times you can just see them feeding every chance they have. If there's years where they're not available, I'm sure they're just feeding on it opportunistically. So if they have the chance, they'll go for it. And it's very interesting because you can see when you're at the seamounts and there's a bait ball that comes up. It's impressive that they can. Sometimes you see the mobula just speeding up before you even see the bait ball. So they either have a very good vision or they can predict the bait ball and just go for it. They just go full speed. So I would say every time they have the chance, but it will also depend if these animals are available or not.
Okay, cool, very interesting. Ines would like to know if you have any advice for a Portuguese student interested in getting involved in manta or devil ray projects.
Well, just feel free to contact me or Manta Trust. I'm sure we will be able to give you some advice. I'll just say be persistent and try. Just contact. I think nowadays we have the huge advantage of being able to just email someone in the other side of the world and ask for advice if we know them from a paper or a project or anything. And people are usually much more open than we tend to think. So just don't be afraid of contacting people and asking for any advice in some particular research you want to do, and go for it.
Yeah, agreed. Especially during this time when people might have a bit more time on their hands as well. It's a good time to talk to people. Okay, so you've answered this a little bit, but I think Jeff wants a bit more information. He wanted to know
Hi, Jeff.
what do you hope to learn from your genetic samples, and where did you get them in the world? I'm assuming it was in the Azores. But yeah, what would you like to know?
Yeah, so most of the samples are from the Azores. We have that amazing place where you can get these samples. It's a minimally invasive process, and we don't have to restrain the animals or anything. They just keep swimming. They're doing their thing. They're not very bothered about it. And we get this amazing place where we can collect a few samples in the same dive. So yeah, most of the samples are from the Azores. And we got a collaboration with another project that was going on with the Manta Trust already involved as well. And there's available samples from other places in the world. And we also have a collaborator in Brazil. So we have some samples from there. The idea is within the Azores, look at animals, if they're related or not. Together with the photo ID, also we have some information on animals that come back in different years, try to understand if we could have the same animals in different years. But have a look at the population structure and possible connectivity between populations. So understanding a little bit if there could be a mix between populations in different places in the world, if there are definitely separate populations or not. There's so much we can ask, and it will depend on the analysis that we do, but also the samples that we get, the quality of the samples that we get in the end. But yeah, the idea is to just mainly understand if this could be one big population, several different populations. We know so little that anything we will get will be new information, basically.
Okay, super interesting. Thank you. Right, Miriam has asked, for the genetics part of the study, are you using eDNA samples or tissue samples? And she wants you to do another webinar on this. So I think she's enjoyed your webinar.
Thank you, Miriam. So I'm using muscle samples for this, and I would love to do another webinar once I have results. I'm still in a very preliminary phase, so I'm still extracting samples, and now all the lab work is kind of stopped. And I'm also working with 2 species of shark. So yeah, it will be still a while before I have some results, but I will be happy to share those once I do have them. The whole point of not only the genetic part, but the photo ID, it's just to provide information on these animals that could in the future be used to help any conservation measures or any regional regulations, for example. So that will be always the end goal.
Okay, thank you. And we have one from Kayla. Kayla wants to know why the mini mantas are endangered if they're not illegally fished or caught as bycatch very regularly in the Azores.
Well, because they are in other places in the world, so they are heavily fished, sometimes targeted, sometimes as bycatch, but they're mainly targeted for their gills, and that happens in other places. So the fact that they are not targeted in the Azores does not mean that the same animals we see there aren't at risk in other places. So mainly because of their life history strategies, the fact that they take a long time to mature, they don't have pups that often, it makes them extremely vulnerable to any type of impact. So if we get, for example, imagine one of these aggregations, it does not happen in the Azores, but it happens in other places in the world. If you have 30 or 40 animals in an aggregation and they are all caught with a net, you're just completely eliminating that part of the population. And before they can recover from that impact, it just takes such a long time. And before we even started knowing a lot about these animals, some of their populations were already being wiped out and declining more than 80%. So they are extremely vulnerable, mainly because of their life history strategies, basically.
Okay, thank you. Very informative. Kador would like to know about ocean warming and how that might affect Sicklefin ray migration routes. He's asking, or she, whether they would change to traditionally colder routes to maintain the same temperature, or if you know anything about the effects of ocean warming.
I don't. I imagine that that currents will be affected by climate change, but it's hard to predict what will happen. Maybe with some models, people are already able to predict more or less what would happen. But we still also don't know much about the drivers of these aggregations. So they're probably a mix between different variables that will affect these animals' presence or not. And that's still to be understood as well. So it's probably a mix of ideal temperature and food availability, a lot of things that are related together. And it's hard to estimate that, but I imagine it will have an impact in every current system, and it's hard to be specific and to know exactly regarding these animals what might happen or not.
Okay, thank you. We've got 2 more questions, if that's all right with you.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So we have one from Ruben. Ruben would like to know if plastic pollution is a problem for the devil rays in the Azores.
That's a good question. These animals have the incredible capability of inverting their stomach and their intestine so they can clean it out. I would imagine that ingesting would not be such a big problem. Maybe if we're talking about microplastics, but still they probably will be able to expel them. I'm not sure. Regarding bigger plastic or marine debris in general, we sometimes see animals with ropes entangled or hooks sometimes. It's not that common, luckily, but we do have some animals in the database that have either ropes, or sometimes they don't have the ropes anymore, but they have marks of ropes being entangled in them, either cuts. In the head, it happens quite a lot. They get stuck, I believe. It might be a blind spot that they have right in front, so they just get stuck on cables, and sometimes they have a big mark on the head. We have a lot of plastic around, like everywhere else, I think so. I don't know much about direct impacts from what I've been seeing. I wouldn't say in the Azores that much, but it would be interesting to have a look at ingestion maybe.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. This last one's from Beatrix, or Beatrice, I might be pronouncing that wrong. She said, thanks so much for your presentation. She really enjoyed it. She's a master's student and she's thinking about the Lisbon Oceanarium, which has devil rays. So she wants to know if you have an opinion on sort of the benefits or the disadvantages of having these animals in captivity and the conservation work that zoos and oceanariums do.
Yeah, so regarding the Lisbon Oceanarium in specific, it's quite curious because it was in fact the first place where I ever saw a manta ray. They used to have this oceanic manta ray, and then they ended up releasing it back in the wild. But I remember it was the first ever encounter I had with one, and quite a few years later, here I am, and they're actually one of the funders of this project. In this specific case of the Lisbon Oceanarium, they do great work in terms of education. They have an amazing education program, and the animal they have, one of the modules they have was actually caught in an aquaculture company in the Algarve, which is in open water. It got inside the cage where they have tuna growing, and it was very badly treated. It was very wounded and all of that. So it was taken to the oceanarium. And I think it's not the case for every zoo or every aquarium, but if an aquarium has a good education program, they invest in education, and in this case, they help several projects to perform their research in situ in the wild, and they contribute to their conservation. I think that's very important, and I'm an example of that. It was the first place where I ever saw a manta ray and got curious for the first time about this animal. So I think they can definitely have a positive impact in kids, especially, not only, but going back to the VR, I think more and more that we can only engage people in conservation if we can engage them emotionally. And for that, you either have the chance of going diving with one of these animals, and then you interact and you see that they are so curious, and you create that connection when you look eye to eye, as I was saying, or you have something like a VR or one of these aquariums that allows you to have that close connection, and therefore make you more interested in conservation, or even thinking of these animals, getting to know these animals in the first place. So I think they can play a very important role, actually.
Okay, thank you. That was a really interesting answer. I think we'll wrap it up there. We've got through most of the questions. So thank you very much, Anna, for your time.
Thank you for having me. And if anyone else has any other question, I'm happy to answer via email or
okay. Great. Do you want to give everyone your email now, or
Yes,
they can
it's
find it on your website?
Manta Catalog Azores @gmail.com.
Okay, cool. I think we've got a couple people that are super interested, so you might get some emails through.
People can easily watch the VR, even if they don't have a VR set. They can just watch it in the computer. Just Google the mini mantas of Maria and you'll find it on Vimeo. It tells you a bit more. The latest version tells you a bit more also about the experience we had at CITES and showing it to the delegates and how it turned out. So it's very interesting. You also have the behind the scenes and you can know about all the trouble we had to go through to make it happen, but it's quite interesting. So make sure you go and check that out.
Yeah, I've watched that one. It's really, really, really cool. Okay, so thank you very much for
you all enjoyed it.
Great talk, and thanks to everybody who has been watching. We have a few more webinars coming up, so you can find these. Let me just make this full screen. There we go. You can find these on our website and on our social media pages. On our website, we also have lots of information on mantas and mobulas and all our affiliate projects, just like Anna's project in the Azores. You can help us support manta research and conservation as well by joining the Cyclone. Anna mentioned the Cyclone in her talk. It's a members only hub where we share all of our latest research. But you can also donate to our emergency GoFundMe appeal, which is designed to help all of our affiliate projects that may be struggling from not getting as much money through from tourism or volunteers as they usually would during this crisis. So you can find the link to donate on our webinar page of our website if you'd like to do that. We have some really cool webinars coming up this week. So on Wednesday, we have Simon Hilborn. He is our oceanic manta researcher in the Maldives, and he's going to be talking about the Maldives' big gentle giants. On Thursday at 10 o'clock, so that's the 7th of May at 10 o'clock in the morning, we have Roger Munns. He's one of the Blue Planet 2 principal cameramen. So he's going to be talking about his experience filming for Blue Planet 2. And on the 8th, on Friday at 3 o'clock, we have Karen, who runs the Mexican Manta Project. So we're going to learn all about the Mexican mantas. So I hope you guys can tune in for some of these webinars. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, everyone, and hopefully see you soon.